Ray Dalio warns of $37 trillion debt crisis. Economic heart attack looming. Imagine your body surviving on borrowed time. This is America's economy right now, according to billionaire investor Ray Dalio. In his most urgent public statement to date, the Bridgewater Associates founder warns that the United States' $37 trillion debt crisis could soon trigger a catastrophic financial collapse he compares to a full-blown economic heart attack. But here's where it gets controversial. Dalio claims this crisis isn't inevitable if policymakers rediscover the fiscal discipline of the 1990s. Dalio, a financial oracle whose predictions carry global weight, recently sounded the alarm through social media posts and interviews, including a candid discussion with Fortune's Diane Tatey. His core message? The U.S. government is now spending 40% more than it collects in revenue, creating a dangerous cycle where borrowing money to pay interest on existing debt could spiral into systemic failure. It's like arterial plaque slowly choking off blood flow, he explained to Fox Business, emphasizing how rising debt service costs are devouring funds for infrastructure, healthcare, and other critical priorities. The investor's proposed solution hinges on a surprising historical parallel: the 1990s economic boom. During this era, bipartisan cooperation led to spending reforms, tax adjustments, and deficit reduction. Policies that Dalio argues could stabilize today's economy if replicated. Trim the deficit to 3% of GDP as we did under Clinton, and interest rates would fall naturally, he tweeted. This approach, he insists, could prevent a looming supply-demand crisis where global investors lose faith in U.S. Treasury bonds. A scenario that briefly unfolded in April 2025, when foreign buyers recoiled from aggressive tariff policies. But here's the twist. Dalio doubts today's polarized political climate can deliver such cooperation. My fear is that needed cuts won't happen due to partisan gridlock, he admitted, pointing to recent legislation like Trump's $3.4 trillion One Big Beautiful Bill Act, as proof that deficit expansion remains unchecked. And this is the part most people miss. Even without a recession since 2020, Dalio argued that inflation and asset price surges had created a false sense of security, masking the erosion of real purchasing power. Could we be sleepwalking into disaster? The investor gives a 50% chance of a financial trauma if debt isn't addressed, a risk amplified by what he calls absolutism in Washington. Critics might ask, is comparing modern economics to 1990s policies realistic in a post-pandemic world? Or does Dalio's warning underestimate the role of modern monetary theory in managing debt? One thing's certain, the stakes couldn't be higher. Failure to act, Dalio warns, could lead to a vicious cycle of higher borrowing costs, reduced public services, and a loss of global confidence in the dollar. As the national debt continues climbing, fueled by legislation passed throughout 2025, the window for painless solutions narrows. So here's a question to spark debate. Is bipartisan fiscal responsibility even possible in today's political landscape? Or are we destined to test Dalio's heart attack theory the hard way? Share your thoughts and whether you'd bet on America's economic recovery in the comments. Sources: interviews with Fortune, Fox Business, and analysis of Treasury bond trends. Legislative impacts assessed via Congressional Budget Office data. When countries go broke, lessons from history and Ray Dalio. Financial collapse, the shocking blueprint for when America goes bankrupt. Precious metals insight. A financial recovery strategy proven throughout history that few economists are talking about. Billionaire investor and hedge fund legend Ray Dalio recently published his thought-provoking book, How Countries Go Broke, as Nathan Lewis highlights on his New World Economics platform in an article originally featured at Forbes. But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens after a nation collapses financially? This question isn't merely academic. It could become desperately relevant for Americans sooner than most realize. For a superpower like the United States, with debts primarily in dollars, financial collapse typically unfolds when ongoing deficit spending becomes unsustainable because bond markets finally refuse to finance it. In theory, governments could drastically slash spending at this critical juncture and essentially balance their budgets. But let's be realistic. When has that ever actually happened? Never. Instead, what governments inevitably do is resort to money creation, essentially forcing the central bank to purchase government bonds or manipulate the bond market through various mechanisms. And this isn't some hypothetical scenario. The American dollar has already been hemorrhaging value compared to its traditional benchmark, gold. While the Federal Reserve hasn't been overtly printing money at alarming rates, the effect remains disturbingly similar. Existing debt gradually dissolves through inflation. This process is already underway, though few mainstream analysts acknowledge it. The initial phases of monetary expansion feel exhilarating, but the euphoria quickly fades. What follows is essentially hyperinflation, varying only in severity. Eventually, this economic deterioration becomes unbearable. At this point, a government is genuinely, undeniably bankrupt. So what happens next? Having a strategic playbook ready for this eventuality is crucial because when the crisis peaks, decisive action must be taken swiftly. This isn't the time for extended academic debates or theoretical proposals. It's time for immediate proven solutions. Both Germany and Japan encountered precisely this predicament in 1949. Though World War II had concluded years earlier, both nations remained under American military occupation. However, attention was shifting toward preventing local communist movements, which thrive when economies collapse, and containing Soviet influence. The United States recognized the necessity of facilitating German and Japanese recovery. The Marshall Plan of 1948 represented one facet of this assistance, but the intervention extended far beyond financial aid. In 1949, Joseph Dodge, a prominent Chicago banker, was dispatched to help restructure the German government's finances. Working alongside visionary local leaders like Ludwig Erhard, Dodge implemented a straightforward but revolutionary approach, forcing the government to operate exclusively on a cash basis. This strategy went beyond merely balancing the budget. The government was prohibited from spending a single mark unless it had already collected equivalent tax revenue. This liberated the central bank from government financing pressures and enabled the German mark to be pegged to gold. The result? Hyperinflation vanished almost overnight. Then came the truly transformative step. Taxes were dramatically reduced. Interestingly, this reduction wasn't implemented through lowering tax rates, though Erhard advocated slashing rates by 50%. Instead, they dramatically increased income thresholds for each tax bracket. The astronomical 95% tax rate, previously triggered at incomes of 60,000 marks, was adjusted to apply only to incomes exceeding 250,000 marks, more than quadrupling the threshold. Similarly, the income threshold for the 50% rate was raised from 2,400 marks to 9,000. Erhard continued this trajectory in subsequent years. By 1958, the highest tax rate had dropped to 53%, applicable only to incomes above 110,000 marks.